afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our session. We're still waiting for some of the participants to join, so just give us a minute and we'll get back to you. If there's anything that you'd like to ask at the moment, just could you please put that in the Q&A or the chat? I see there's a raised hand. Can you just put your question in the Q&A for now? Thanks. Okay, thanks for letting us know that the chat is open now. But also if you have questions, you can put it in the Q&A. Chat is open now. So let me check. We have how many participants? We have 36 participants, and let's just give another half minute and then we'll get started. Thanks, everyone. Okay, let me see. I think we can get started. We are already recording. Right, so let me say a formal welcome to everyone. We're really so pleased that you can join today. The session that we are doing today is part of the Scopus Researcher Toolbox, and we're talking today about Scopus for journal editors. So we'll be focusing on the topic of getting a scientific journal indexed. So we'll look at that specifically from the Scopus perspective. The first thing that I want to do is to introduce our speakers for today. So we already have in the house, welcome to Professor Jaya Raju. Let me just introduce her. She's a full professor and head of the Department of Knowledge and Information Stewardship at the University of Cape Town, Humanities Faculty. She holds a PhD in Information Studies from the former University of Natal, now UKZN. Her research focus is on, so sorry, I lost my place now. I was reading to you. Sorry about that. So her research focus is on the development of research-based LIS competency indexes that can be used in practice, but also in academia. She was editor-in-chief of the South African Journal of Libraries and Information Sciences, and currently she serves on the editorial advisory boards of several journals. Jaya Raju is also chair for the Library and Information Science and Multidisciplinary journals on the Scopus Content Selection and Advisory Board. So she will be talking to us mainly from this perspective today as a member of the CSAB, and we'll talk more about that. She's also currently the co-chair of IFLA's Building Strong LIS, Library and Information Services Education Board. And yes, I will stop with that. Jaya, we look forward to your presentation. Before I hand over to you, I also just want to, in advance, introduce our other presenter today, which is Susan Murray. And Susan Murray is the Executive Director of African Journals Online, AJOL, It's a non-profit organization working to help create conditions for African knowledge to be translated into African development. Susan has held this position for the past 2.5 years, and she has over a decade of previous experience in management and research in other non-profit organizations in Southern Africa. Her academic qualifications are in development economics, and she has a particular interest in the critical significance of access to information for economic growth in developing countries. So I can't at the moment see if Susan has joined us. I think we're having a little bit of technical issues, but Susan will be hopefully joining us soon. Before I move on to the speakers, just some housekeeping. So we have muted everyone in this session. It's because we are making a recording. So if you do have a question, please put it in the Q&A section. You can also communicate with us using chat, of course. The recording which is being made will be sent to you, as well as the slides that we are presenting. You'll receive this automatically via Zoom. So you can look out for that, and then we'll also make it available on our Africa Success portal. Before we get started, I also want to invite you to join us for other seminars and sessions that we are presenting under the Researcher Toolbox series. So the next session then being in July, we will talk about, so there's before July, we still have one in June, which is about diversity and inclusion in science. And then we'll talk early in July, the 3rd of July, we'll focus on university rankings, so understanding the significance of publications and how they are used in the rankings. So if you have your phone handy, just take a picture of the QR code where you can register, and we look forward to you then joining us for more sessions. Today's program, we're going to do a very brief introduction to Scopus, for those of you not familiar with Scopus, and then I'm going to hand over to Professor Roger to take us through the Scopus selection and criteria, but specifically from the perspective how she, as a member of the Scopus Content Selection and Advisory Board, looks at journals that apply for indexing in Scopus. Then Susan Murray will talk about African journals online and the various evaluation criteria and materials that they make available to support journals in enhancing the quality of their journals and making them more ready for indexing. At the end of the session, before we hand over to, before we make time for discussion, I'll just also recap on what the submission process looks like. So from the Scopus perspective, we refer to this as a suggestion, a journal suggestion. So I will just be going through, what that actual submission process looks like, and then we'll have time for discussion. So I'm going to start off with the actual topic of today and just give you a brief introduction to Scopus. So Scopus is a global multidisciplinary database for discovering academic literature and includes visualization tools also to analyze search results, as well as metrics to measure research performance. To give an indication of the scope of Scopus, what can you expect to find indexed in Scopus? So Scopus covers about 27,000 active journals, which originates from about 7,000 publishers. So these publications, each of the articles or the papers, we call them documents because it could be different types of papers, come into Scopus, and as they are, enter the Scopus database, they are linked to a journal, to an author profile, as well as an affiliation profile. So in total, the scope looks, is about 90 million items. It also includes all the citations. So going back to 1970, the number of citations adds up to about 1.7 billion cited references. So Scopus is used for literature searches, but it is also used for various other use cases. So in terms of identifying and analyzing journals to read or to submit to, also to track researchers' impact, to decide where and whom to collaborate with, and various other use cases. So I'm not going to discuss all of these metrics, all of these numbers with you, but also just to give you an indication of what you can expect in Scopus is it covers journals, conferences, books, and patents. It's multidisciplinary, covering physical sciences, health sciences, social sciences, and humanities, also life sciences. The database is updated daily with about 12,000 new articles. No differentiation is made in terms of open access or subscription. So the current count of open access documents at the moment is about 20.5 million documents. The coverage of gold open access journals at the moment is about 6,128. So who determines journal selection? And this is our topic of today. It is done by the Content Selection and Advisory Board. This is an independent board of subject experts from over the world. And board members are chosen for their expertise in specific subject areas. So this is a picture, and somehow I couldn't find a picture where Jaya is part of this group. So I've added you in, Jaya will be doing the rest of the presentation today. Before I hand over to Jaya, I just want to also give you an idea of the criteria itself. So we have two levels of criteria when journals apply to be indexed. The first is an in-house, is done in-house by the Scopus content team, where they will look at criteria such as peer review, English abstracts, whether the journal has English abstracts, the regularity of the publication schedule, Roman script references, and a publication ethics statement. If journals comply with these criteria, the journal is forwarded to the Content Selection and Advisory Board, where 14 selection criteria are then taken account of. So this is just an idea, just a quick idea. I'm not going to go through all of these. I'm not going to go through these criteria. This is what Professor Jaya Roger is going to do, but I do want to make you aware that this is available, the complete set of criteria that is used for journal selection is available on the elsevier.com webpage. So I've put the complete URL on this page. So if you want to look that up, we will be sharing the slides afterwards, after the session. Right. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Professor Raju with just a last mention of the fact that there is that the Scopus selection is a rigorous process where less than half of the review titles are selected for Scopus coverage. And I think Professor Raju will give us a good indication of why this is the case. So over to you then. I'm going to stop sharing. Professor Raju.
Thank you, Lucia, and thank you for that warm introduction. I'm just trying to share my You able to see my screen? Lucia, is my screen visible? Thank you.
Your
Thank you
screen
very
is
much. Good, great. Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you again, Lucia, and to the hosts for giving me the opportunity to share my experiences as subject chair, and hopefully through that sharing, editors present in the session will get an idea of some of the nuances that the chairs look for when doing serious consideration for inclusion in Scopus. Some of what I would cover, I'd like to make a few introductory remarks and then talk about my role as a subject chair. And similarly, there are 16 others working in other disciplinary spaces, who would do reviews of journals and come to decisions. The criteria that Lucia already mentioned, and I will take each one of these in turn and do some sharing on some of the thinking we do as we review the journals that come before us. A brief statement about publication ethics, and then some concluding remarks. By way of introduction then, the technical aspects, Lucia covered some of it, and that is in the purview of the Scopus technical team. So I won't spend any time on that, but what I would like to focus on in today's presentation are the qualitative aspects when journals come before us for review. As a subject chair, on the Scopus content selection and advisory board, I provide an independent perspective as a scholar. I'm a journal editor myself. So that puts me in a good position to see what editors are coming with. And then, of course, sitting on the board to see, in what way improvements can happen, what advice or what guidance one can give so that journals have strong chances of being included in Scopus. It is regarded as being prestigious. It's very good for the credibility of a journal to be included in Scopus. And as many of us are aware, in many of our institutions, a Scopus listing is also a qualifier for subsidies in many of our institutions. And here I'm referring particularly to South Africa. I will be sharing my own experiences, and and I have the privilege of also being able to share with you some of the thinking of my fellow subject chairs, because we meet in person twice a year in different parts of the world. And this gives us an opportunity to engage very intensely with each other, sharing our experiences in the different disciplines, and trying to come up with ideas on what is it that we can do to provide guidance, so even the journals that are declined, we can send back reports which they can work on and can be assured of acceptance the next time round. And the reason why we meet in different parts of the world is because during these meetings, we also engage with local role players for journal quality development, and our engagement here with local board chairs, local editors, etc., also provides an opportunity for journal quality development. So as a board then, we're an international group. There are 17 of us that serve as independent subject chairs. And I think this is what makes Scopus stand out from other indexing databases. It's a unique feature of Scopus, where the decisions are made independently. The board is given independent status, and a subject chair will make a decision, and that is what goes through to the editors, of course, together with whatever other guidance is necessary. We are responsible then for careful and continuous curation of content, and we take our roles very seriously. We, as a board, attempt to determine whether a title is eligible for indexing in Scopus. There's a set of criteria. Lucia shared that with you, and I will also unpack them individually. But the point that I need to make is that these criteria are continuously developed. That is part of the reason why we meet twice a year, because each time we meet, we go back to the criteria and we look at what kind of adjustment is necessary so that it increases the chances of journals coming on board with Scopus. We also get involved in re-evaluation of titles that are already indexed. So once a journal title is indexed on Scopus, that is not the end of the road. Your journal is very carefully monitored, and if at any point there's a drop in quality, then there is a re-evaluation and the title can be delisted. I feel very privileged in that I serve as a subject chair, the only subject chair coming from the African continent. I'm very passionate about development in Africa and very invested in the development of quality scholarship in Africa, particularly considering the space that we currently are in, where there's a lot of, there's pretty much a paper chase in terms of getting articles published, journals becoming indexed, etc. And I personally feel that with just the way the world has evolved, particularly with with many of our countries having been subjected to colonialism, the global South and Africa in particular tends to suffer certain disadvantages. And it's one of the reasons why I spend a lot of time in this role. I'm very into the promotion of good science and maintaining integrity of science in the way the whole process is managed for inclusion in an index such as Scopus. My role and the responsibility I take in the way I review journals is very strongly informed by the idea principles of inclusivity, diversity, equity, and accessibility. And I think those principles are very important, particularly for us in Africa, where in many instances we do encounter certain capacity challenges, and we believe that our colleagues in the global north somehow manage an easier road. And particularly in our recent meeting in Singapore, which took place last week, these principles of inclusivity, diversity, and equity were strongly focused on, and these are some of the principles which we center when we are evaluating for Scopus inclusion. The area that I work in is the information-related disciplines, what we know as the GLAM disciplines, galleries, libraries, archives, museums. And of course, these sectors are very interdisciplinary. So it is not by accident that I also look at multidisciplinary journals. But the subject chairs are very experienced. Some of the subject chairs are in their roles for more than 10 years. I'm in my role for more than 5 years now. So we quite comfortably toggle into other disciplines, do re-evaluations in other disciplines. So we don't necessarily work in just our own disciplines. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide. Lucia shared it with you already. These are the 5 sets of criteria looking at policy, content, standing of the journal, regularity of publishing, and online availability. And in the slides that follow, I will attempt to share some of the nuances that we consider when we are looking and interrogating these criteria as journals come to us for review. just some general points in terms of the way I personally apply those criteria when I'm, when I'm reviewing a journal. I think a point I made already is the interdisciplinarity of my discipline, which is information sciences. And a point that I made already is that while this is, journals in this discipline as well as multidisciplinary journals are in my purview, I also, in terms of reevaluation, or for that matter, the appeals process, journals can appeal. I'm called on to do either one of these in any one of the other disciplinary domains as well. An issue that journal editors, authors, journal managers from the global south, particularly from Africa, are often confronted with is that of regional and national contextuality. Is it just international journals? What is international, that are considered for Scopus? I'd like to actually assure you that regional and national contextuality are considered, and considered very seriously. So while your journal might be locally contextualized, if it has global relevance, then it is a strong candidate for Scopus inclusion. So right at the outset, I think it is important to make that clear. I take as a subject chair a development positionality in terms of advancing quality standards of journals. While I feel very strongly about the fact that African journals from the global south deserve spaces in an index such as Scopus, that does not mean we drop or lower the quality standards. Yes, we do admit that there are many underserved regions of the world, but I think we should make it our business to make sure that when it comes to quality, we can actually compete, and compete fiercely and confidently with the rest of the world. And this applies to both journals that are selected as well as journals that are not selected. For me, if a journal is selected, that's well and good. But if a journal is not selected, I see it as my duty, my responsibility, my obligation to actually provide a very detailed report so that editors and managing editors can go back, look at what the gaps are, attempt to address the gaps, and then put in an application again and be assured of acceptance for Scopus listing. The big question for everybody, and all of us are chasing metrics. Some of us belong to disciplines where it is a lot more conducive to accumulate citations. But at the same time, I'd like to assure colleagues that as Scopus subject chairs, we are very cognizant of the fact that there are many disciplines, for example, within the humanities, the social sciences, and sometimes even amongst the science disciplines, where citation aggregation doesn't come all that easily. So I'd like to assure colleagues that at the CSAB, we keep a good balance in the application of quantitative and qualitative criteria. So if metrics are not sitting high up, it does not necessarily mean your journal will not be included in Scopus. There are other very compelling qualitative criteria that we look at, and you could still get included or accepted into Scopus. The whole idea is the promotion of good science, and good science is not necessarily dictated by metrics. So in my capacity as a scholar, as a research methodologist, and with a passion for maintaining the integrity of science, I'm looking at a balance of both qualitative and quantitative criteria when I review journals. Yeah, now to look at the criteria specifically, looking at journal policy. So I'm going to go through each one of the 5 criteria. I shared that with you, and Lucia did as well. Let's look at journal policy. One of the first things that appears in an application for Scopus listing is the scope of coverage. Quite often, I find that editors don't take this seriously enough. It's very much a cut and paste, something that appears on the website or appears in the journal. I would like to advise that when you are making a Scopus application, spend some time working on the purpose statement, because your subject chairs take that statement and they match it with the content that comes through on the journal. And if there's a misalignment, then that actually, doesn't work in favor of the journal. Sometimes these purpose statements are too vague, they are too broad, they lack a particular niche. And some guidance that I can offer is make sure that your scope of coverage includes the purpose of the journal. Who is the journal intended for? Is it intended for established scholars and authors? Or is it established for emerging researchers? We very often find that that is actually not identified. And the more closely you can do that, then it allows the reviewers to match very nicely that purpose statement with the content that comes with the journal. Are you working in a broad disciplinary area, or there are sub-disciplinary areas? Let us know about that. What are the types of articles that are featured? These are some of, when I say have a very focused and well-articulated scope of coverage, these are some of the areas that one should be covering. So what is included in your journal? Are they just research articles? Is there space for other types of content as well, like conceptual or theoretical articles, reports from the field, opinion pieces, policy reports, etc.? Not all journals cover all of these. Some journals are very selective about what the content is. We need to know what that content is. Provide a clear peer review type and process description that is suited to the discipline. Now, different disciplines adopt different peer reviews. There's no one peer review process that is better than another. It doesn't necessarily mean double blind is the best. Single blind sometimes will work for a particular disciplinary space, or sometimes open review. But be explicit about what that is and provide a detailed description about how you go about that, because remember, what we're looking for is integrity of the review process. Adopt diversity in the geographic distribution of editors. If you want a global reach, if you want to show relevance to other parts of the world, while we might be operating from Africa, our content might also have relevance for other parts of the global south. So it helps them to have editors from other parts of the world. And from my 5 or 6 years of reviewing journals for Scopus, what I've noticed is that the more the global reach in terms of editors, the journal is also able to attract a greater geographic distribution of authors, because that is also an indication of global relevance. You are going beyond your institution, you're going beyond your local region, and you are providing opportunity for authors from other parts of the world to work with your journal. To continue with the journal policy, be careful about, or be cautious about starting a journal in a subject area that is already covered by established journals. You've got a better chance of being included in Scopus if you are servicing an area that is not all that well covered by other journals. We also find that some journals tend to choose titles that are already in existence and quite often by other well-known journals. Immediately the subject chair becomes a little bit suspicious of that. Sometimes it could be, purely, it's inadvertent, it's accidental, but it's something to be careful about. Also be careful about starting a journal in an area where there's limited interest. Then you're not going to attract citations, you're not going to attract authors. You might have just a few items per year. So yeah, and I'll talk a little bit about that a little later on. Something that is very common is that we have a journal and we find that in the issues, there are just too many articles in the journal that are being published where the authors of the editorial team are members. So immediately there's conflict of interest, there are ethical issues involved, and subject chairs look at that very carefully. That editors are publishing in their own journals. Not that that is, one should not do that, but of course, as soon as that becomes a bit extreme, then it actually calls the integrity of the journal into question. Very important that every article that is published should include relevant dates. For example, when did you receive the manuscript? When was it revised? When was it accepted? And now, of course, with a lot of journals being published online only, when did the online publication take place? These are important indicators of rigor of peer review, as well as quality management of the published content. And you really lessen your chance of the journal being included if somewhere on the first page of the published article, these dates don't appear. Sometimes we go in search of it. Sometimes it's not on the front page. It might be, right at the end, but in the interest of the journal, it should be declared up front. It's something that the journal is being transparent about, so we can see, what is the timeline. If a paper was received and in 5 days' time it's been published, then we know there's a rigor issue involved there. DOIs, we know, this is something that is happening more and more now. A lot of journals are including it, but for journals who are not including it, remember these are important for discoverability and accessibility of published content. So it's in the journal's interest to make sure it includes DOIs. A little bit of a tricky area, number of issues and items published per year. And I'm sure there are a number of you in the session who are saying, so how many do you think we should publish per year to give us, a good chance of being included? That is a difficult question to answer. All I can say as a subject chair is be careful of what we refer to as outlier statistics, because that could raise a red flag. In other words, too few, per year, per issue, could be an indicator of underperformance. But on the other extreme, too many, is particularly if there's a sudden escalation in the number of articles published, we also see that as being problematic, in that could be impacting on quality of content. What about manuscript turnaround time? That's another question that people often ask how often it should be. Hard to say, but I would say something between 4 and 6 weeks from the time a paper comes in up until the time it is accepted and ready for publication. And also your acceptance rate. If there's a 90%, 100% acceptance rate, that's problematic. At the same time, if it's too low, then that is equally problematic. So a good balance, somewhere between 50 and 60%. So here as well, please be careful of outlier positions. Your content quality, there should be alignment between the content and the purpose statement I spoke about earlier on. Something else that we look at is are the articles contributing to the field? And that's why you find that a number of us actually come from specialist areas of science. So we have a fair idea as to what is going on in our discipline, so we can get an idea as to the extent to which the journal is contributing to the field. Is there evidence of research grounding? We can see that from the headings, subheadings, the use of literature, empirical visualizations, your reference lists, etc. And remember, reference lists, I mean, sometimes journals come to us and we wonder why so little attention has been paid to discipline and consistency in referencing, both the in-text referencing, also looking at things like footnotes, endnotes, and sometimes we return journals say those things need to be cleaned up if you want to be seriously considered for Scopus listing. Your geographic reach of authorship shouldn't be too limited. Even if you are locally contextualized, your article content should have global relevance. And we spoke about citations. I mean, what do citations tell us? It tells us evidence of scholarly relevance, but as I mentioned already, this is quite often discipline and time dependent. You know, we also know the gestation period between an article being published and it being cited can be anywhere between 12 and 18 months. So that is something that we consider as well. Still on content, I can go through these very quickly, being conscious of time. You know, the technical aspects, layout and typesetting, we expect your journal to look very professional. Pay attention to quality of tables, your figures, other visualizations. Yeah, and of course, it goes without saying, grammar and language in the articles. We'd like to think that the journals come with very strong copy editing services. Watch out for uneven scholarly quality among articles. So, you know, you might have, you know, 10 good articles, but 2 or 3 very weak articles, and we will spot those. Your guidelines to your authors should be clear, and quality of abstracts should be on the mark as well. Translations, particularly that I emphasize the idea principles of inclusion, diversity. So it doesn't necessarily mean if the journal is not an English language journal, it will not be included in Scopus. Scopus does include non-English language journals, but remember the title, the abstracts, keywords should be in English. Lucia also mentioned earlier on the reference list, because of, you know, use, you know, for purposes of use, should be in Roman script. I just thought I'll give you some new statistics, which I sourced from Scopus itself. 2 years ago, when I did this presentation, there were 10% non-English language titles in Scopus. As of last week, it's 20%, so it's almost doubled. That is an indication of commitment by Scopus to diversity and inclusion. Journal editors, and I'm sure there are a number of journal editors in the room. I'm afraid we look at your standing. So we take the role of the editor-in-chief very seriously, because the editor is responsible for stewarding the growth and development of the journal. You should be somebody who's pretty well known in the field, widely published yourself. We expect you to have a strong publication profile, because it is only with such a profile we can see indications that you can actually lead a team that is responsible for quality content. So we do rate the standing of the editors. We also look very carefully at the editorial board. Sometimes we see very big boards. It raises questions about padding, but then we are matching those boards with the content, where the authors are coming from. We look at institutional affiliations, and suddenly if we see too many junior members of the board, we see those as indications of padding. If there are, for example, very high profile people from all over the world, so there should be a good balance. We're very aware of the fact that editorial boards are also capacity building. So yes, by all means, there should be junior scholars, but we also like to see some well-established scholars as well. Something we come across quite often is that we get journals from institutions where all the members of the editorial team are from that single institution and all the author contributions are from that institution. We expect you to be a little more extended than that, and those are the journals we send back, give you some guidance on broadening out a little bit and ask you to come back. Again, citations viewed with discernment, considerations given to disciplines, how well it lends itself to citations. We're also looking at where these citations come from, because sometimes citations can be manipulated as well. So what is the percentages of citations? Who is citing them? How recent are the citations? And Scopus has what is called a radar tool. And if there's some mischief around the citations, that is picked up and could be a reason for declining. We're very vigilant in the evaluations and very, very conscious of the fact that there should not be cases of excessive self-citations. Yeah, publishing regularity, one should be on time. If delayed, by how many issues? Online availability, you know, are you covered by at least some bibliographic databases? I spoke about the DOIs. Do you have a homepage? What is the quality of that homepage? And of course, do you have an organized archive of articles, you know, on your website? And as I come to the end of my presentation, very conscious of unethical publishing practice. This is a challenge throughout the world, global North as well as global South. And of course, you see that Scopus expects you to comply with the 16 principles of transparency and best practice in scholarly publishing. And the journal is expected to have on its website a valid publishing ethics statement. And yeah, if you go to the Scopus website, you get a lot more guidance on that. Some concluding remarks then is, yeah, the whole idea is to provide journal editors and other role players with an idea on, you know, how a journal needs to be positioned in order to make a successful application. And, you know, I strongly believe that if a journal is declined, you know, that shouldn't be the end of the road. One should view that as an opportunity. You should see it positively to see how you can actually advance the standard and quality of the journal, fill the gaps that are, you know, are itemized and then come back for reapplication. And depending on the amount of corrective work that is required, you know, we give you an embargo. Sometimes we say, come back in 6 months or 1 year or 2 years. And of course, if there's a lot more time that is required for the journal to grow and develop, we can give as much as 5 years. I emphasized again my development position as a subject chair, you know, I always provide careful guidance, and a lot of my subject chair colleagues do the same, so that on your next application, you should come back more confidently. If the journal is accepted, please remember it's not an opportunity to be complacent. You've got to actually maintain the standards so that you can remain in Scopus, because underperforming journals can be flagged, reevaluated, and can be dropped. And my last slide here is, you know, from perspective from Africa, you know, for me, the rigor of the application, Lucia emphasized it's a very rigorous process. The rigor of the application process, I think, does a lot in preparing journals for, you know, for quality marks in being vehicles for good scholarship. And for me, this contributes to the advancement of quality scholarship in Africa. And this is what I think we should be aspiring for as journal editors, you know, and because as Africa, we want to be a contributor to the global knowledge production. We just don't want to be users of what is produced by the rest of the world. And it's for this reason I invest a lot of my time as a subject chair in this whole process of journals applying for being listed in an index such as Scopus. And on that note, I'd like to end and say thank you very much for giving me your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jaya. Yeah, that was a very insightful presentation. And I think we are really privileged to have you to contextualize your work on the CSAP from the, you know, in terms of the issues that we experience in the global south. So thank you very much for the, you know, for doing that. We have got some questions which I'm looking forward to getting to, but before we do that, I just want to share another few slides about the actual process. So let me just get back to my slides. And in the meantime, let me also just mention that unfortunately our other speaker has not been able to join. So we will follow up and make sure that she has an opportunity to also share her knowledge and, you know, expertise with us at another occasion. So let me talk a little bit about the actual process of suggesting a title for indexing. So it's to suggest a title, there's only one way, and that is to do it via the web page or the web form that has been designed for the purpose. So the links that you see on the screen are very important. Firstly, about the content page. So this is, you know, an overview of the content that is covered by Scopus. And then the next URL that you see on the screen is the actual web form. If you have any queries about the process itself, also note that there is a web address or an email address where you can pose your questions, and these questions go to the Scopus content team. Right, so you see an image on the screen, and this is you know, what the form looks like. Not very attractive, but it's very functional. And I just want to share some tips also, you know, when you get ready to input your information into this slide. So keep in mind when you are you know, submitting your application, that only serial titles may be suggested, right? So that's from journals, book series, and conference series. Also that the suggestion may be made by the publisher or the editor of the title. And it's important also to share this information with the editorial team. We have had, you know, cases where one of the members of the editorial board made a suggestion for a title to be indexed while the entire team was not available, you know, was not aware of that. So, but it can be, you know, preferably by the publisher or the editor of the title, but it could also be done by an individual, you know, a researcher or a librarian, but make sure that you could communicate with the editor and the publisher about this. So the submissions, as I mentioned, is only via the online form, and it is free of charge. So we also had a question in the Q&A about what is the cost. So the cost is not on the side of the journal. The cost is on the side of the subscriber to Scopus. So when a journal applies for indexing and when it is approved as well or accepted, there's no cost involved. So all questions have to be answered. This is mandatory, and there's also and this is something to get ready in advance. And this is why I'm also sharing this. There is a question on the form to also upload full text journal issues. So 9 articles plus a table of content. So it's good to have this ready in a PDF format these need to be uploaded along with your application form. And then it's useful also to know that there's not a starting date for applications. The submissions are evaluated continuously. It is a long process and can take several months up to a year. So it's good to have the expectation right about how long the process will take. So once the submission is made, you will get a tracking ID. So this tracking ID will also give you access to a system where you can track the progress of your evaluation. So this is just a visualization or in a flow chart of the whole process. So starting with the title suggestion form, there will be the Scopus minimum criteria check, which is done by the Scopus in-house team. There can be two responses to this. So either a not accepted, or three actually. So it can be not accepted for review. So you'll receive a feedback letter. You can also receive a letter giving you an indication that there are minimal criteria that need to be updated. And if this is done, we call this a publisher enrichment form. If this enrichment is done, it can be resubmitted, or the title can go, or the application can be released to the CSAB, the Content Selection and Advisory Board, for review. From the CSAB, it is forwarded to a subject chair for review, which is an external review, as we've just heard, and then feedback is provided to the suggester and the publisher of the journal. So that's the entire process. There are some questions that I've already noticed, but I think we can handle that in the discussion section now. So with this, we can go. I'm going to stop sharing and we can look at some of the questions. So I'll start with the questions in the Q&A, and I think I've left most of the questions. I think Jaya will be able to assist us with answering these questions. So I'm specifically interested also, Jaya, in your take on whether Scopus monitors for predatory practices and tendencies and what action is taken against predatory journals. So from your experience as a reviewer, how do you look at the predatory journal issue?
Yeah, Lucia, before I respond to that, I just want to say we are due for load shedding at 4. So if I'm dropped, I'll be back in a few minutes. So maybe some other discussion can happen. So if I disappear, it's yeah.
Thanks.
The whole concept of predatory is very rigorously debated by the CSAB. What is predatory and what is not predatory? As subject chairs, we prefer to talk about underperforming journals. Predatory is where there's some unethical practice involved. And obviously, if there is some unethical practice, then Scopus does take action. But a journal that is not performing well, for example, the content inclusion has dropped, or over a period, there's been a short period, there's been a dramatic increase in the number of articles or items being published, then that is a performance issue. So I think at the outset, one needs to differentiate between underperformance and predatory. The word predatory is used so loosely that quite often journals that don't deserve to be labeled predatory are labeled predatory. But it could be just suffering from maybe a change of editor, there's been a switch in editors and something has happened to the journal, and hence it is underperforming, and with a little bit of guidance, the journal comes back on track. So it is in that very nuanced way that the CSAB deals with the issue of predatory. It is not dealt with in a generalized way. But I mentioned earlier on during my presentation that Scopus uses a radar tool where it does pick up anomalous behavior, in terms of, fixing of citations, citations coming up from a particular journal or particular region of the world, that something does look like, something is not right, but no title is dropped immediately. Scopus engages in a very rigorous process of review. Subject chair is called on to look at the journal, and again, a decision has to be made by the subject chair. Do we delist this journal, or do we give the journal an opportunity to continue? And I hope that answers.
So it looks like we may have lost Professor Roger there for a second. So she will be returning. I've definitely got some questions that I wanted to respond to specifically. Let me just see if there's anything that we can respond to in the meantime. So a lot of questions have been added while I was talking. I think there was also a question. I think I saw a question about how to determine whether a journal is indexed in Scopus. Right, so that was in the chat actually. So while we're waiting for Professor Raju to rejoin, I just want to mention that there are two ways. So Scopus has a free version as well. So if you go to scopus.com and your institution does not subscribe to Scopus, so Scopus automatically picks up your subscription via the IP domain where the query is coming from. So if you don't have a subscription to Scopus, there is a free version as well where there's a list is made available with all the journals that are indexed in Scopus. So this list can give you an indication. If you are not a subscriber, you have access to this list. You also have access to your author profile. If you are a subscriber to Scopus, in Scopus, on the home page at the top navigation bar, there's an option of a link for sources. If you click on the sources link, it takes you also to a complete list of all the journals that are indexed in Scopus. Right. So I think this is to know whether a journal is indexed in Scopus is to use, if you're not a subscriber, is to use go to scopus.com. It will automatically take you to the free version of Scopus where we can see a list of all the journals. Otherwise, subscribers go to scopus.com as well, but then you will have access to the full, contents of Scopus, and there's a list under the sources button where you can see all the journals. It has filters, so you can use the filters by subject or by title, by ISBN and by publisher, and in that way you'll know what is covered by Scopus. So thanks for those questions. I'm back in the Professor Raju, are you back? That was quick. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. UCT and the switch from to the generator takes a few minutes. Apologies for that, your colleagues.
No. It's only the colleagues that are not in South Africa that we have to apologize to. Right. So we have a good question, I think, from. I thought maybe you want to answer this question. So in the second question was, why are there many journals published in Africa that are not included in Scopus, and publishing in Scopus index journals very expensive. So you mentioned, the specific issues, challenges that we have from the Global South. What is your take on this?
Yeah, at the meeting in Singapore last week, Scopus shared with us a map that did indicate parts of the world where there are huge gaps in terms of inclusion in Scopus, and the Global South features strongly. But the parts of the Global South that are very strong, well, I have my own definition of what Global South is, but Asia is very strong, and these are where local boards exist. Places like, for example, Thailand, Korea, etc. And of course, China is very strong, but the LAC region, Latin America and the Caribbean, and Africa. And, there are various reasons for it. One is not enough applications coming from Africa for Scopus inclusion, and I suppose it's one of the reasons why Lucia is holding a session like this. And also it's unfortunate that Susan wasn't able to share her presentation with us today. Susan comes from AJOL. AJOL works right across Africa, and Scopus is looking to AJOL and other Pan-African platforms to encourage journal editors to come forward and make applications to Scopus. Historically, and how most things have happened historically with the Global North, because of very specific advantages, have been in a position. I mean, I'm editor of a journal from the Global North, and it has been in Scopus for what I'd say, about 30 years or 40 years. And similarly, Global North journals have been well positioned, to be listed on Scopus and other indexing databases. But the Global South, is still actually working in that area, challenged in many ways. And I'd like to think some of what I outlined, some of what Lucia outlined, would actually encourage journals in Africa to come forward, not be afraid to be declined maybe on the first round, but it's like when you send a paper to a journal. When your paper is declined, you use that as an opportunity to better the paper, to strengthen it, and then get published. Exactly the same principle applies to an application to being in Scopus. Lucia had a second part to the question, was why is it so expensive to publish in Scopus listed journals? That is an ongoing debate. Particularly with a lot of journals now publishing open access. Some journals are fully open access. Other journals are hybrid journals. So if you want your paper published open access, there is the whole argument about APCs, article processing charges. And by virtue of the fact that we are located in Africa and we look at our currencies in Africa, and by the time we convert that to dollar rates and pound rates, etc., it becomes almost unavoidable. Lucia knows there's an ongoing debate in that area, and there are very strong voices in Africa currently working to try and fight that battle. So there's no current solution to it, but I think a starting point is it doesn't cost you anything. I saw Lucia's slide there where your application to Scopus is free. So comply with the quality criteria, apply, and allow African journals to be guided into the process so that you can have a successful application.
Thanks, Jaya. Thanks for that. We've got two questions related to editorial boards, and they're big questions, but maybe you can give us a summarized, answer to those. The one is about just guidance about how to, get together an editorial board, and the second question related to what is your advice in terms of the size of the editorial board?
Okay, I'll start with the second one first. Be careful of an editorial board that is too small and one that is too big. We find that some journals on the website, the listing of members of the editorial board will go on for about 2 to 3 pages. That leads to suspicion that you're kind of just trying to impress. So I think, a good balance there is important. And also, the members of the editorial board should be functioning members of the board. They shouldn't just be there. And remember, in a discipline, subject chairs actually know these individuals in the discipline. And I've heard colleagues of mine on the board saying, I've called up so-and-so, and they say, well, I don't know. I'm listed as a member of the editorial board, but as far as I'm concerned, I play no role. And I don't even have an idea that I'm a member of that board. Mm-hmm. So that brings me to answering the first question, how you put together the member. You should have good global representation, or for that matter, if we're in Africa, we should have good representation from Africa. But every person should be approached, formally approached with an invitation letter, formally accepted, outline the role of the individual. You're just not an ornamental member of the board. You should be a functioning member of the board. You should outline what your roles are. We're meeting twice a year to talk about the journal. How are we going to improve the journal? What are we going to add? What are we going to remove? What kinds of articles, etc. In other words, a board member should be an active member of the board. And subject chairs pick up very quickly when the board composition is an artificial composition. I hope, Lucia, very quickly I've answered both of those.
I think so. Thank you very much. There's also a question about what is a suitable level of citations for articles? So you mentioned one of the criteria is that the journal should be cited. Do you have something in mind that you can share about what is the an appropriate level of citations?
That's a difficult one to answer, and the two factors to consider. One, it's time dependent. For a journal that started in 2021 and coming to Scopus for evaluation in 2023, you would not have accumulated too many citations, but we would look for other indicators. And also it's discipline dependent as well. As the subject chairs, we are aware of those disciplines where you can accumulate citations quite quickly, but we also know there are those disciplines where citations don't really play a big role. But we would like to see some indication of citations. There should be evidence of the fact that there is a steady flow of citations. There could be a steady flow, but they could also be fixed citations, self-citations, orchestrated citations, and the radar tool of Scopus does pick that up. So to strive for as many citations as possible is not necessarily going to get you included in Scopus.
Thanks, Chair. And then there's can you maybe say something about the embargo period? There's a question related to time intervals for reviewing an article, but we're not talking about article reviews now. So can you tell us something about the embargo periods when a journal is rejected and invited to reapply? There are different intervals at which this is done.
So it could be 1 year, it could be 2 years, 3 years, and 5 years. And of course, as we go up in the number of years, it means more corrective action is required. So I've got to be realistic as a subject chair that when I decline a journal and when I enumerate, and we do that in a lot of detail, these are the areas that need improvement. I ask myself as a subject chair, how long is that going to take the journal? Do I think that it can happen in about 2 years? And so as a subject chair, we make a recommendation on the embargo period. And in the journal, I very seldom I mean, a journal has to come to us of really, really bad quality to say 5 years, because the 5 years is a long time. It's somewhere between 1 year and 2 years, because journals that come for Scopus listing have the whole process. Going through the application makes you take a good hard look at your journal. And sometimes things that you haven't considered before, you suddenly start thinking about. So it comes to us with elements of strength. And there might be gaps that need to be plugged in. So what we would do is we'll say, okay, this is going to take 6 months or a year or 2 years. And you'll see the letter that actually comes out says, please make sure that your next application comes by that date. And an important part of that letter is that when your application comes in, just like how we do when we submit an article that has been, an editor says, come back with how you've addressed the concerns of the reviewers. It comes back with a letter saying, you pointed that out, I have attended to it, here's the evidence. You pointed out why, I've attended to that, here's the evidence. And if you provide the evidence, almost immediately, you will be accepted into Scopus.
Okay, thanks for that reassurance. One of the criteria is about the editor's standing, and there's a question about this in the Q&A. So supposing best would be editor-in-chief does not, oh, sorry, that's a bit. So the editor-in-chief, if the editor-in-chief does not meet the threshold of being widely published, per Scopus requirements, can a journal be given due consideration on Scopus? I think that links to your previous answer, possibly.
Yeah, we would say we would like to see a stronger editor standing, but it would not be a basis on which we will decline the journal. But the subject chair, might put in, we'd like a re-evaluation of this journal after 2 years. And when the journal comes to us for re-evaluation, we'll see if the editor standing has improved. But something I didn't get a chance to say when I was doing the slide presentation, because I was conscious of time, is that what happens sometimes is that the website indicates somebody is an editor, or the editor-in-chief, or they are co-editors-in-chief, but the application form states someone else. So, and we find that journals do that because they are camouflaging certain things. So in your application, you put certain high-profile individuals in, but please be aware of the fact that we're matching what's on the website. In other words, the way the journal is currently functioning and what's in the application. We are testing it for veracity. And immediately you see that, you kind of see a little bit of dishonesty, then it makes you look deeper into the journal. I would say if you are an editor, you are developing as an editor, you don't have, you have a publication profile, but it is not all that great. I would say be honest, put it in. Put it in, it's not going to be a reason why your journal will be declined. We'll give guidance on it, and we'll say, we will watch out for that in the future. But if you try to camouflage it by putting in somebody else's name, then I'm afraid that kind of works against the journal. I think that's all I want to say on that.
That makes sense. Yeah, thanks for that. The next question I might just answer myself. So there were 2 questions about can journals in Agile and then also open access platforms, assuming something like the Director of Open Access Journals, can they be indexed in Scopus? So yes, by all means. And in fact, as Joya mentioned, we are conscious of the deficit of journals from certain regions, Africa included, that that is not well represented in Scopus, and we are looking at these journals proactively and encouraging journal editors to apply for indexing when we notice that they comply with a number of the criteria, and Susan would have spoken about that also today. So indeed, there's no journal that is excluded. So if you meet the criteria of the of the inclusion, then yes, by all means. But the impetus is on the editor to apply for indexing, to go through the suggestion process. From our side, we are proactively also looking at that, and we do find administratively actually that it is difficult sometimes to get hold of the editor, just to encourage the editor to submit an application for. We can't do that on behalf of the editor. So, but we are working on that. So I hope that answers those questions about eligibility. I don't want to actually answer questions related to metrics because they don't really relate to our session today. We can do that offline. You can send us to me or to Dineshri if you have any questions about metrics. Let me see if there's I'm not sure, Jaya, if you have information about the time interval between the actual application and the response. What we know is the information that's available on the website is that process can be months, between 6 and 12 months. I don't have more information from my side. I don't know if you have information.
What I can contribute to it, Lucia, is that all subject chairs are given about 6 weeks. Remember, we are reviewing a lot of journals. So each subject chair, so there's a process before and there's a process after. And that organogram that was shared by Lucia indicated subject chair review. So it sits with us for, a journal editor could look at it in, a subject chair could look at it in 1 week. So, so you're given a maximum amount of time, but it needs to be out before that time. But the subject chairs are very good. Some of them, it comes in a day, it's reviewed and it's out. So you might even be lucky. Recently, I heard someone say, wow, I didn't expect this to come back. And it came back, within 6 weeks. So, it all depends on, are there issues? Remember, subject chairs are not just looking at the application. They are reaching out into the discipline, not just looking at the website, but also looking for other information. Sometimes the evaluation team is contacted because some information is missing. So that can cause a bit of a delay, but we make sure we keep within that window period that is assigned.
Okay, thanks. I think we've covered the questions. And with that, then, unfortunately, I want to apologize again that we didn't have Susan joining us today, but we will definitely make sure that we have another session where we can invite her to speak. Jaya, we really want to thank you. I think we're very privileged to have you on the CSAB and to share your knowledge and your insight, with us. Thank you for making time to do this in your very busy schedule. For the audience, thank you very much for participating today. Thank you for your questions. Please look out for the feedback or the recording and the slides that we will be sharing with you. And by all means, our email addresses will be on that. So reach out to us if you have any further questions. I hope this was a useful session for you. We look forward to seeing you in the other sessions of the Researcher Toolbox. Jaya, is there anything that you would like to say as a last remark? And then we can end the session.
No, thank you. Apart from saying thank you, Lucia, for giving me this opportunity, I'm very passionate about journal quality and integrity in scholarship and the promotion of good science, particularly for us in the African region. And, my last line of guidance and advice would be just, strive for, I just think we can compete as fiercely and aggressively as the global north, and quality shouldn't be an issue for us. We must just work at it. Thank you, Lucia.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the comments coming in. And with that, thank you, everyone, and have a lovely afternoon. We'll see you soon again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.